I want to shift gears here a little bit and talk about the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which you covered for South African broadcasting and wrote about in your book, Country of My Skull, which we'll link to in the show notes. But for listeners who are not familiar with the commission, can you give the broad stroke overview of what it was and what it sought to do?
After the release of Nelson Mandela and the ANC, the leaders who had not been elected, so the National Party, the whites were not elected by black people. The ANC's leaders were in exile. They were not elected by black people. So this group of leaders came together to draft an interim constitution so that the interim constitution can guide the election. And then those that are elected will draft our new constitution. So by the end of this process of the interim constitution, before they signed it, there was the question, okay, this is the door, this is the beginning of our democracy, but what will the police do if we tell them after that we will put you on trial and you will be punished for all you did of oppression? The same with the army. Will they then protect the election or will they then sabotage it? So the amnesty clause was added in at the last moment of the interim constitution, that a body after the election will look into the deeds of the past and give amnesty to people who fully confess and give the order of command and give the detail. So after the election, the new parliament drafted then the legislation for a truth commission. Truth Commission was 3 committees, one for violation of human rights, the other one for reparation, and the third one for amnesty. And those 3 committees spread out right across the country and heard testimonies of people who underwent gross violation of human rights. Gross violation was kidnapping, torture and murder. And others listened to those who asked amnesty. So that process went on for a few years. A final report was written, and it was handed over to Nelson Mandela by Archbishop Desmond Tutu. Although Thabo Mbeki was then the president, he refused to accept it because he was against the findings of the commission. Why South Africa's Truth Commission became so famous, it did 2 things for the first time. The one was the testimony of the victims were public. It was not behind closed doors. The second one was not to give blanket amnesty, but to give individual amnesty. So individuals had to come forward, also in public.
The Truth and Reconciliation Commission was so special in that way because it really forced a social reckoning among people across racial categories with what other people in their country had experienced, and really defined, I think, or redefined the notion of what our country meant, right? So what South Africa meant to people, because they had only ever seen kind of one side of the coin or one side of the die in many ways. There's been some great work by a political scientist named Jim Gibson on kind of South African racial attitudes post-apartheid. And one of the things that Gibson's work gets us to think about is how important learning about each other through the Truth Commission was. I mean, I think about some of the work that you've done, Jenna, with podcasts and the media, and how important the media story is to the TRC, because just having these commissions wouldn't have done the heavy lifting of getting people to really know about it. I think it really was the fact that these stories were being broadcast on national news every night, right? Every morning. It was difficult to kind of move about your day without hearing really horrific stories of human rights abuses, but from a very human perspective.
So Cyan, you mentioned that your work focuses on post-conflict transitions and, what happens after political violence and the kind of rebuilding effort. I wonder, have other countries over the past 30 years looked to South Africa and the TRC as a model about how they should should approach these situations?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so the TRC is one of the kind of institutions that comes up again and again in post-conflict transitions and in democratic transitions as kind of an important starting place. There are some real critiques, right? So we talked about the lack of focus on economic issues through the TRC, which arguably was one of the hallmarks of apartheid, right? When you think about things like segregation of education, but also kind of employment opportunities and things like that, and land redistribution. The failure of the TRC to really wrestle with, I don't want to call them lower level issues, but just different types of violations, really, I think, did not move the country forward as far as it could in terms of setting it up for success. The other concern about the TRC is it really dealt with gross violations of human rights. And so it was the real high level violations that were able to receive reparations and potentially morally justifiably so. But many other people in South Africa who experienced lower level crimes did not see the same reparations payments or were kind of addressed in the same way. So there also was the component of amnesty. And so I think when other countries turn to South Africa, they're thinking very hard about whether or not these different pieces really fit their model.